It hit pretty much like towards the south side of the island. A lot of houses were demolished, like from the foundation. What was left was just the concrete on the floor. Like our house, we lost everything. All our clothing, we had nothing but just a few pairs of clothes.
Welcome to Rehabilitationships, a new podcast from Mary Free Bed Rehabilitation, bringing you real stories of recovery from real patients and real clinicians.
Welcome back to Rehabilitationships, a podcast highlighting the intersection of rehabilitation and relationships. I'm your host, Chris Mills. For this next story, we're going to take a look at nursing and rehabilitation. We're releasing this episode on National Nursing Day, our chance to honor the work and sacrifice of nurses across the U.S. And we're doing that by sharing a story of two nurses, Cangco and Kathie Fetting. Annie and Kathie actually met in Saipan, a small island in the Pacific Ocean that's a commonwealth of the United States. For our local listeners here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, Saipan is geographically the size of Grand Rapids, but only a quarter of the population. Saipan is over 5,600 miles away from the continental U.S. That's over twice the distance from the mainland to Hawaii. Our story for this episode is more than just about the distances traveled, but it's about a bond that's made and how a nurse can care and give when they're working with a patient in a hospital or when they're volunteering with the Red Cross. We've got a great story to share today. So good, we're going to be splitting it up into 2 episodes. Here's part 1, and we'll drop the second part in 1 week on International Nurses Day. And now on to this episode of Rehabilitationships with Annie and Kathie.
I'm from the island of Saipan. It's in the Western Pacific.
I'm Kathie Fetting. I've worked at Mary Free Bed for quite a while now. I was here when we still were in the old hospital and had not put the addition on and left and came back. And I was a resource RN, and now I work employee health as a resource RN.
Annie, tell me a little bit about what life is like in Saipan, and maybe educate some listeners who think of this island out in the Pacific, but they don't know the actual connection with the U.S.
Oh, I've met a lot of people here, and I've told them where I'm from, and they kind of question me whether Saipan is that isolated that we stay in teepees. I said, no, Saipan is actually very modern, up to date. We got Wi-Fi. We don't climb anywhere to catch Wi-Fi. So we got like hotels, tourists. It's a tourist destination. So it's really laid back. So being here in Grand Rapids is a big change because I'm trying to adapt to city life, and it's hard. I'm still missing the laid-back features of Saipan.
I've heard about Hawaiian time. Is there Saipan time too?
No, Saipan and Hawaii are actually about 7-8 hours away. Hawaii is more fast-paced than our island. It's much bigger. So our island is just like a tiny, tiny island.
So how long of a flight would it be from here in Grand Rapids, Michigan?
Depending on what you take, because when we flew here, it took us about 21 to 22 hours.
Saipan is actually a U.S. territory.
Yes,
People
it is.
don't know that.
It is. It's a U.S. territory. Whoever was born there becomes a U.S. Citizen, but we don't get to vote for anything here in the States. We don't get to vote for presidents. We don't have that opportunity. So,
tell me about your family and what you did for work on the island.
Back in the island, I used to work for hospitality industry because there's a lot of tourists. So I worked there for about 10 years in a hotel. And then I quit and helped my mom because she was sick. So I took care of my mom, my dad, and my grandpa.
So unfortunately, your son had an accident. Can you tell me what happened and how he got hurt?
For what we were told was that the car hit a sidewalk, the side of the sidewalk, and it flipped over 3 times, and he was ejected from the back seat out of a small opening through the window. The window never shattered, it never broke. It just, with the pressure of it rolling, it just like kind of squeezed him through that back window, and he flew out and landed on his neck, which cost him his spinal cord injury.
Now being a nurse tech, you probably know more about the technical medical injury that he had, but where was his injury and how did it affect his...
He had C6, C7 spinal cord injury. So he's paralyzed from the chest down. His upper body strength is really good. I mean, he can bump transfer and all that. He's pretty independent with himself. Right now, he's learning how to cook on the stove, which is pretty good. This morning, he just cooked breakfast for us. He did scrambled eggs, which is good. He's doing a lot of things, too.
How long ago was this, and how old was he when this accident happened?
His accident happened in 2016, and he was only 19.
Gosh, that had been really hard for him.
It was, because he was such a social person. He would have friends and just be outgoing. He's always out there. So when the accident happened, it kind of struck him like really hard, because now he's not able to walk. He's not able to drive. He doesn't go out and all that.
Kathie, when you were working on the floors, did you work with spinal cord injury patients? Do you know, or maybe even just trauma patients, what that's like for a patient to have that shock and that change in their life?
Yeah, it's life-altering. You leave your house that morning and you're upright, walking on two legs, able to go and do whatever you want. And an hour later, you suddenly could do nothing. And it's an entirely new normal that you need to adjust to. And relearning things that were so simple the day before. You could brush your teeth, you could feed yourself, and now you need adaptive equipment to do the simplest things, and you can't go to the bathroom on your own. You can't tie your shoes. And there's a lot of fear and a lot of anger, and I can't imagine what they're feeling going through that.
What was the immediate recovery for him? Did he have a lot of resources that you see here in Michigan? Did he have a lot of places for him to work on recovery and gaining more skills and using his wheelchair?
Back home, the rehabilitation is very limited. When he was getting rehabilitation, it was once every 2 weeks. All they did was the rubber stretching and the electro, where they put the patches on, and that's all they did. Not like how it is here in Mary Free Bed, where the rehabilitation is actually really intense. They actually work you out, but back home, no.
So back to the mainland, Kathie, how did you get involved in nursing? What drew you to that field?
Always having wanted to help somebody, whether it was an animal or a person. I went kind of a roundabout route to get to nursing, kind of dipped my toe in pre-med, and then thought maybe physical therapy, and then I thought, no, settled on nursing and didn't look back.
And what types of nursing have you done throughout your career?
I started out working for the state psychiatric system, tested the waters, ended up in home care, and moved back to Michigan, and I've spent 25 years or so doing home care. So I've alternated between home care and Mary Free Bed, and for a while both at the same time. And this is that happy medium between acute care, where your patients come in the door and they may be gone the next day and you establish no relationship with them, whereas in home care you could have the same patient for years. So here you get to know the whole person. The patients are here long enough, even as a resource staff, that you still get to develop those ties that go beyond just it's Mrs. whoever in room, whatever. You really get to know your patients and what you can really do to help them on their road to regaining their independence.
I see this passion you have for your patients, and you even go beyond your work. You actually were volunteering with the Red Cross. Tell me how you got started doing that.
Watching the news like anybody does, and you think, wow, that'd be cool to go do. But when you have kids, you can't really just say, leaving, I'll be back in a couple of weeks. And as soon as my last child was out the door to college, Harvey hit Houston. Of course, they did big stories here on the news of shrinking down the training so you could be ready to go in 2 days' time. And I thought, not now, when? And so I did my training and went off to Harvey and eventually found myself in Saipan.
So are those the two places you've been? You went to Harvey and then Saipan?
I went to Harvey, I went to Florence, when North Carolina got hit. And then I did a little time up in Baldwin when we had the tornado up there several years ago.
I know it's very different being a nurse on the floor and then supporting people during the Red Cross. Are there any similarities that someone might not know?
There's a lot of basic similarities, but a lot of differences too. You aren't doing nursing like you do at Mary Free Bed. You're much more limited because you're in a different state, and that liability with licensure, there's a fine line, but we do a lot with educating the clients on resources, providing hope that this is going to get better. When they do have medical needs, trying to arrange to get those met.
Annie, during your time growing up in Saipan, did you ever, or how often, did you have like typhoon, hurricane warnings?
Oh, it was all the time. From July to November, it's typhoon season.
So it happens a lot. You're warned. Have you been through a typhoon that was bad before 2018?
Yes. It's just 2018 was the worst. No, it wasn't the worst one. Super Typhoon Sotler was the worst one because it had a tornado in it. Yeah, that
Sounds
was
like
the
a
worst.
movie.
Oh yeah, we were right in the middle of it. It was so bad. Like the mango trees were all twisted. Like you can see, it wasn't broken in half. It was twisted. Like it just came out of nowhere. People weren't prepared.
How serious do people take the warnings? Is it something where like people are hunkering down every single time, or is it the boy who cried wolf? You just don't necessarily take it serious as much?
A lot of it just becomes like tropical storms and then it blows away. But if it has hit different islands before us, we only know that it's getting stronger as it comes to us. So we just continue to monitor the weather through the news, and then they'll send out warnings. Whether once they say typhoon condition 1, you got to run. Like, go and seek shelter. There's no staying at home, but a lot of people just decide, they decide to stay home and not seek shelter.
How was the warning for this one in 2018? What was the name of it again?
Typhoon U2. Super Typhoon U2.
And was there much warning? Did you know this one was going to be bad, or was this more of a surprise?
This one, we had a bit of time of warning. It's just getting all the people to the shelter was a scramble because we had to wait till last minute when the winds were strong. That's when they came and picked us up over at our place because they were trying to find a suitable place to place us because of Bradley. Bradley needs like his own room to be able to change his brief and all that, and they actually sent us to a shelter that used to be a rehabilitation for drug abuse, substance abuse, which was equipped with 24 hours power, generator.
So you guys were lucky in this sense of it, the location you were at, but how did the storm go, and what happened to your house and your friends and family?
The storm was bad. Like, it hit pretty much like towards the south side of the island, and we were sheltered in the north side. So the south side was like a lot of houses were demolished, like from the foundation. What was left was just the concrete on the floor. Like our house, we lost everything. All our clothing, we had nothing but just a few pairs of clothes. Everything. We lost everything in that house.
I can't imagine. I mean, you see pictures, but sometimes you kind of get numb because is that a movie? Is that real life? But what was it like when you went back to see your house?
I cried because it's like 2 years of our life was in that house, and we had nowhere else to go. Our family was having their own issue, with the typhoon. We didn't want to go, to our family. So it was hard. It was really hard. But a lot of the community got together and started helping one another, which was a good thing. It was great.
So, Kathie, when did you first hear about this super typhoon? And What was the first thing that went through your mind when you heard about it?
We were just looking that up as to when exactly it hit. And I was tracking it because for some reason, I think all Red Crossers, you can vouch, once you have deployed to a hurricane disaster, you kind of start watching to see what's coming on the horizon. And the news or the weather people were in awe of you two because it was the largest typhoon that had ever come that way. And it was the largest to ever hit a U.S. territory when it did. And you kind of look up Saipan, it's like, wait a minute, isn't that a U.S. territory? It's like, will Red Cross go? And it's like, well, that'd be kind of cool. And then it's like, well, would it be cool if the island's decimated and you're not sure where you're going? And I put a feeler out to our recruitment person here, and she got me on the list, and they called me the next day and said, I'm ready to go tomorrow. And I was like, oh, not yet. And it was a little quicker than I planned on, but they gave us, before you'll deploy a lot of places, especially when Maria hit Puerto Rico, they're considered hardship deployments. And if it's an island deployment, it's even longer than usual. And they send out the list of recommended things that you bring with you. So we were told there would be limited food available. There would be no water available, or very little. We had to bring mosquito netting. We needed all this stuff for sleeping in tents and to load your backpack full of Cliff Bars and expect not to, have access to communication and, bring a backpack because you wouldn't be able to wheel your suitcase anywhere. And I was like, okay, it's like, am I really up for this? And I thought, well, I would be dropping in. The people on the island, if it was truly that bad, are the ones who are living it. So I said, I can do this, and I was blessed to get the chance to go. There was a lot of destruction that, like Annie said, like the shelter they were at, there was power, there was water. It's just, you could draw a line across the island. And this half was some branches down, and this half, there were sticks that came out of the ground that used to be trees. There were no leaves. There was nothing green. The airport was in ruins.
There was airplanes twisted, like broken airplanes from that typhoon.
I still can't get over the fact that the Red Cross told you to bring water for yourself.
We were supposed to buy a water purification filter.
That's just hit me for how real that is. I mean, that is insane. So run me through the timeline on how long they told you were going to go and how long you were there for.
Because it's so far away, to make the best use of Red Cross funds, you have to go a minimum of 3 weeks.
What was it like when you got off the plane and you were there and you first saw the devastation?
Our flight from Guam had a lot of FEMA people, a lot of Red Cross people, but it also had a lot of islanders who had been in the States when it happened or had gone to Guam or somewhere else and were now being allowed back on to the island because there was no traffic allowed for anybody who didn't live there or was rescue worker. And the lady across the aisle from where I was sitting, as soon as she could actually see out the windows down onto the island, just broke down. And I thought, am I really ready for this? Can I help? And you didn't notice a lot when you got off the plane, but it's once we got our first drive around the island, and I saw, anytime I see an electric pole that's bent a little sideways now, that's the first thing that comes to mind because every electric pole was like this down the streets.
You're listening to Rehabilitationships, a podcast from Mary Free Bed Rehabilitation, and I'm your host, Chris Mills. This is the first of a two-part story, looking at what makes a nurse and what it means to give. If you're enjoying this episode, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe, and tell a friend about it. Now let's get back to the story as Kathie continues to share about the beginning of her experience on Saipan.
I remember being very impressed, was my first impression, because it was 5 days afterwards, and Guam had people there. I know Saipan did. I don't know who the other electric company trucks belonged to, but they were out there putting those poles back up, restringing the lines. They weren't waiting for somebody to come do it for them. It was the resiliency of the people on the island to just start doing what needed to be done to the best of their abilities. Everything Red Cross was very different on Saipan than in the States because they're in the middle of the ocean. Before, it's always been everybody floods into the schools for the storm, and then most often everybody goes back home. And this time,
We couldn't.
nobody could go home. And they didn't know what to do because now they have all these people to shelter, and that isn't how it worked before. For a lot of people trying to decide now, what do we do? Nobody has a home to go to.
Do you have a specific job when you volunteer for the Red Cross, and what were you doing here in Saipan?
I'm part of disaster health services. In my past deployments, we would even go out into people's homes and do things like helping them get reimbursement for things they lost. Say their walker or wheelchair was damaged in the flooding from a hurricane, or all their medications were washed away. We would reimburse money to get those things replaced or help expedite going through the pharmacy to try and get them an emergency supply of medications that needed to be replaced. I've met Annie's daughter first and had talked with her, and she introduced the disaster mental health services person who was with me. Then we got to know Bradley, and it just struck me that it seemed like being disabled was not necessarily accepted on Saipan, nor was the island even pre-hurricane set up to allow someone to be independent. And I thought, if he could be here, it would be life-changing.
Having lived in both places now, do you agree with what Kathie said about it wasn't necessarily like very accessible or disability friendly there?
Yeah. You hardly see people who are disabled out in public. It's like they try to hide away. Being here in Grand Rapids, as I told Bradley, I said, anywhere you go, you see disabled people. You see people in wheelchair. I said, they also have a lot more resources out here. Back home, once a person is disabled, they basically put them as like, oh, they can't do anything. They can't live. It's like, I'm not trying to talk bad about my island, but it's like they don't try to bring in resources like how, they have here, at least to help the people out.
So there's opportunity for growth and progress there.
Yes, much, like a lot. There's a lot of room for growth.
Kathie, was it just in passing a little bit that you were working with Bradley, or did you start like connecting more with Annie and Bradley?
We started out, they called it itinerating to shelters. One group of us, which had shelter workers, mental health, and then healthcare. And we also had someone who was local who the first week drove us around. And we would stop at each of these places and kind of assess what their needs were, what supplies they might need, if there were any healthcare issues. And I got to know, like I said, I met Annie's daughter first, and she took us back to meet Bradley, and even then he was very reluctant to actually kind of see us or talk to us. And I was like, it's okay. It's like, we're here to help you. What do you need? And it was that darn wedge pillow. Being on Saipan was a very frustrating experience. And here I could have gone to Walmart and bought a wedge pillow, and there was one somewhere on Saipan, and trying to find this wedge pillow, something so simple and basic, was so frustrating. He and another gentleman up there both wanted a wedge pillow, and every day I would have to go back. And the other gentleman, his eyes would light up, "My pillow?" I was like, "No." And when we mixed teams up, the next person I was paired up with said, "Oh, a wedge pillow? I know where a wedge pillow is. I know where there's two of them." And I'm like, are you kidding me? Because we had a classroom full of supplies that it says we have all this stuff. Where are these things? And they'd gotten a few here, a few things there, and we had the bulk of it in one place, but the two pillows were on a stage at one of the elementary schools in the cafeteria, just sitting there. And that was my most glorious endeavor as a nurse ever, was to find these stupid wedge pillows. And the day I could say, "Look, It's like, I told you I wouldn't leave till I found these wedge pillows. But it was something so simple. But, I mean, that was it. That's what was needed, was something so simple.
It made a big difference because Bradley couldn't lay on a flat surface. So having about 3-4 pillows, it still didn't help him. So by Kathie going out and finding that wedge pillow was... he was very happy.
It made me really grow as a nurse because it's things here. I'd go to the supply room, the med room. Oh, we don't have it. Well, I'll call Central Supply. Oh, we'll order it. We'll have it tomorrow. All right, problem solved. No, they couldn't get things onto Saipan. It ended up being that some country sent 2 Antonovs, the biggest cargo planes in the world, to start around every day, would send in one and send the other back home and unload supplies because nothing else could get in. The airport was essentially shut down except to cargo traffic. And we learned when we left, if you weren't in the air by 4:30, your plane wasn't leaving till the next day because there was no power at the airport. There were tractors parked along the side that had flags on it to help mark the runway, and people standing out there waving flags. And if you couldn't visually see the people, you couldn't take off.
Annie, what was it like getting connected and getting to know Kathie? Did you form any kind of relationship with her in that short time?
Yes, the first time I met her, I invited her to eat some fish. I said, come here, try some fish. She sat down. She said, I've never had this guy. I made sure she sat down. She was a good company. She ate all her food. Yeah, because in our culture, a guest that comes to our house, we open up our house to them. Our food, it's like a welcoming for you. I'll put all the food on the table. Come, have a seat. Some people would consider it, what do you call that? Disrespectful if you refuse. Yeah. Because it's like, this is from my heart to you. I don't need to know you. You're a guest on in my house. So you're like a family. You're like a family to us.
And little did you know that she was going to repay that favor for you down the road.
Yeah. So we stayed in contact, since that time I met her. I think it was the first day that we exchanged emails because there was this older couple that lives in the house. It's like the people that are sheltered in that whole house, we all became like family. So this older couple, we called them mom and dad because we were in the shelter for quite a long time. We were there for about 3 months. So we got the older couple who had to have power all night because he was on a CPAP machine that he constantly used. So I helped take care of him and take care of the older lady, and then I took care of Bradley, and then we had another kid who was on an oxygen 24/7. She can't live without it, and had to take care of her too because she had no family around.
So you were doing hospitality before this, and then you started being a caregiver.
So hospitality and caregiver kind of kicked in when I got into the shelter. Yeah.
Kathie, you were there for 3 weeks, and then you had to leave. Did you ever think you'd see Annie again?
No. It was very hard to leave because in a deployment in the U.S., you're either in a mass shelter with hundreds of people, so you don't get to know who you're helping necessarily. Or you go out and see someone once in their home and give them their Red Cross cards and everything's good and you go on your way and you miss the people you work with. But this was very different in that you saw the same people every day and you got to know them and you got to know what they really needed and what wasn't being met. And then it was your turn to leave. And I went around my last night with the person who was taking over for me and said, now, this is this family. This is Annie. This is Donna. This is JD. And this is Bradley. And you need to take really good care of them. And I said, and this is the older couple. And I said, you need to be really good to this man. And they were my family by the time I left, and I didn't want to leave them behind.
What a great story so far. And that's where we'll end it for this episode. If you want to learn more about Annie and Kathie or see some of the photos from the damage to the island, click the link in the show notes. Be sure to check your podcast feeds next Thursday on International Nurses Day as we share the second part of their story. In that episode, you'll hear as Annie gets the opportunity to relocate to the U.S. mainland and how our friendship with Kathie continues to grow. Thanks to Annie and Kathie again for sharing your story. All of our listeners are really going to enjoy the next episode. Thank you all for listening to Rehabilitationships, a podcast from Mary Free Bed. Every month, we'll share amazing stories just like this, highlighting the intersection of rehabilitation and relationships. Make sure you rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love to hear your feedback as we launch this new podcast. Send us your thoughts at podcast@maryfreebed.com. If you want to change a life just like Kathie and Annie have, and change yours as well, think about becoming a nurse at Mary Free Bed. We're looking for nursing staff who will bring hope, love, and inspiration to their patients and each other. Find out more by visiting maryfreebed.com/nursing. And with that, I'm Chris Mills, your host for Rehabilitationships, and until next time, thanks for listening and stay well.